Welcome back to another kind of funny reaction, this time to the Amazon original series Invincible. As always, I'm Tim Gettys, and I am joined by Greg Miller, Andy Cortez, Nick Scarpino, and Kevin Coelho. Andy Cortez, I want to start with you as somebody who has not read, the only one of us that has not read Invincible. What did you think of the first 3 episodes?
Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. It took me a while. I think the first moment that kind of really got me was a little tiny line of dialogue when he's fighting the 2 robbers and the rock-looking dude in the streets.
Yeah.
And he says, "Who are you?" I haven't really thought of anything yet. Any suggestions? Like that little line really, really got me. And anything before that, I felt like a lot of the dialogue just wasn't really hitting for me. Like some of the moments that I should have been laughing at, I just wasn't. And that moment got me. And then from then on, I feel like everything started moving a little bit faster, which, you know, obviously not every show is going to start off with a bang, but we had to develop his powers first. It immediately just sort of set up everything in a very simple way to understand, but it was still... I love that they're still talking about, you know, these large grand concepts that we haven't fully, I guess, you know, seen yet.
Did episode 1 end with a bang for you? Did you see that coming? Did it actually surprise you? Okay.
No, yeah. Now I had seen a GIF of the eye popping. Didn't know what that was alluding to. Didn't know who that was or anything like that.
Yeah, of course.
But the way episode 1 ended, I wish I had a camera on me because I found myself with my mouth just doing the "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" moment. And then it ends, and then you just go, "Holy shit, I have to start part 2 right now," obviously. And then, I just think it keeps on getting more and more interesting, and these dynamics that we're creating, and you start to kind of forget what is happening, and then you realize, oh, fuck, I kind of forgot that Omni-Man killed everybody. Jesus. Like, I like, what's happening there? So I think it's setting up a lot of really interesting scenarios, and I am just immediately intrigued. I want to know what the hell's happening, and episode 3 ends in a very interesting fashion as well. Super in. The voice cast, phenomenal. I'd say the animation could definitely be better. Yeah. I've heard some stories from some sources that, you know, the better teams work on the really good fight scenes, and it's kind of obvious.
You can tell that, right? And that's the thing for me too, is I'm going into this, like, a lot of the just them in the house or them just doing normal stuff is what it is. I think it's serviceable. Yeah. But I think that when you're doing animation, obviously you're on a budget, right? You don't have millions and millions of dollars just be throwing at these things because you have to weigh that cost benefit. But I think where they threw the resources where they count, and it's it's into those big battle scenes, the fight scenes, the fight later where he fights Alan the alien, like all that stuff. It looks great, sounds great, and I. But think
also budgetary wise, a lot of the budget to the acting, because I think the cast is phenomenal.
Can we talk about, first off, like the 2 people that stand out for me, or the person that stands out for me is Jason Masikas. Like that, him as Rex is. I was like. And it's like I always have a second where I have trouble placing the voice. So I just get to live in the performance for a few minutes before I realize who it is. And I'm like, of course, that's why I'm loving this so much, because he's so freaking funny in these comedic roles. But he's almost so good that he makes everyone around him seem a little like Bush League, just a little sometimes. And it's because his energy level is so great in those scenes that I want everyone to rise to it. But that's not necessarily what Invincible is about.
He's so over the top. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound right. And like 4 lines in, I'm like, oh, no, they nailed it. Like, this is what Rex is supposed to sound like.
Greg Miller, you are undeniably the biggest Invincible fan. I know you're the one that introduced it to all of us, and
I did not realize how many people I had introduced it to. I thought like because Kevin, I did to you too. Is that right? Somebody said that on the show?
Oh yeah,
all 3 of us.
That's crazy. I thought Kevin was like long term around for long before then. I saw Destin Legary giving me credit for it too. That I lent him the books. I'm lending people books left and right. Yeah. It's crazy. I'm glad so many people listen to me on this. Thank you. I saw tweets about it too. Thank you very much for listening to me on the comic and now hopefully watching the show.
So, Greg Miller, being what you are, what did you think of the first 3 episodes?
Oh, I mean, I loved them. Like, I think that everything everybody said so far is exactly right. Like, first off, like, you know, entering into MCU or even DCEU or whatever, watching things like that I like I love comic books, obviously, and watching it with someone else, like I hope they enjoy it, but I'm not like hung up on it. Pressing play on Invincible, not knowing what we were getting for episode 1, I sat next to Jen the entire time doing that, like out of my eye, like, is she enjoying this? Are you like, is this working for you? Is this too? And like I'd done the whole preamble before of like, I don't know when they're going to do it, but like there's a turn that comes that's very important. So if you're bored in the beginning, it might be because you're supposed to be, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it's if you think it's just Superman and his Superboy kid, like it's going to go a little bit different places. And so like riding out the entire episode and then getting to the punch screens, which I always think are weird, both in the starts of the episodes and the second. I think they need to work on that a little bit. That doesn't work. I'm Invincible. I'm like, all right. Like,
it doesn't work like Dave.
It does, yeah.
It didn't work like.
But to get to the end, like when it went boom, the Invincible and the blood splashed on it, and then it cut into the after credit scene. There was that inhale of everybody getting ready to discuss it, and then that started, and then it was, oh my god! Everyone in the room was like, "What the fuck? Like, holy shit! What the?" Because like that is exactly what I've talked about to people what I talked about to Robert, and what I talked about to people in the room was very much like, this is exactly what it was like to read the comic. And get that page flip and be like, what the fuck? And then get the other page flip, right? Because in the comic, it's just, they all get obliterated, right? Except Immortal. They all get, and then he gets fucking clowned out too. But they all get obliterated, right? And then it's Omni-Man. Like, that was my feeling of in those like 2 or 3 pages, right? Then put into the screen of this huge fucking brawl that was different enough for me, right? Like if you watch, I tweeted it out. They had sent me this out of context. They were just like, we're gonna ruin part of the show, but we want to get your reaction. And I was in a video with Jason and a whole bunch of other influencers and people. And for me, when it starts and he speeds out of the way, like I was like, oh shit, it's different. And like to get to go through that and have that, knowing what's happening, but also having to think of like, I can't believe it's happening like this. I can't believe they're actually fighting back and they're actually giving him a run for his money and doing like, I thought that was so cool. I'm sorry. Long story short, it was a dream come true to see something I love this much and think doesn't get the credit it deserves put out there. Like I tweeted it last night. Last night I teared up fucking going to Amazon to watch the bowling documentary, but there it was like, boom, Invincible at the top and Invincible right there. And it was like, what a time to be alive.
Kevin, what'd you think?
I loved it. It's so like crazy. Like we're sitting here watching all these great shows, and Invincible is one of them. Like 40 minutes an episode. It's awesome. Like I never could dream that like we were gonna get here. And when that first episode ends, and I'm sitting there with my little brother because we watched I also then pushed that to him when I found Invincible, and he loved it. So we were both excited, and we're like, oh, I wonder when they get to the, and then like you hear the audio and you're like, oh, so something's still happening. And it's like, oh, and then you see it and it's like, oh, this is so rad. I can't wait. I'm so excited to see where how far the show gets, like season 1 gets. And it's like one of those other things that I'm sitting there and being like, I really hope that we get like 10 or 15 or however many seasons they need to get to the end of this show, because I love the way it ends. And it's just one of those things that like we're sitting there now talking about like story points or plot points through the like comics. And it's like, oh, what if they get here? And it's like, oh, but wasn't that like issue 50 where it's going to take a long time to get there? And it's just like, that was so exciting.
That was like a liberating moment too of like how much Invincible there is, which I urge you to read and go support your local comic book shop. But like when it ended, we watched all 3 in that first night. Like Lucy and Jen were in and they were in, and then it was the over, and they had questions, and I'm like, I'll spoil the whole fucking thing for you if you want, because like I doubt we get to the far reaches, and like okay, and so I'm like, and so Monster Girl, well, let me tell you, and it's like all these fucking like. The Invincible comic book works so well, right? Again, because I think it started so simple, and it introduced these characters, and you didn't know that you'd be with them for years and years and years and years. And they wouldn't do the thing that is a turnoff for so many people about comic books, right? Like they're, for the most part, weren't all these there's never giant events that are tying in that you need to go read every book to understand. You can just read Invincible straight through and get the entire story and not feel like you're missing something. And so that leads to them having their own cinematic universe in this one book that now is coming to life, and that's crazy. But to think about all the different things they could do, Kevin, as I'm out there and I'm talking about duplicate, and like also for me, like I forget how old I am and how old Invincible is, right? Of talking about like nearly 2 decades ago, I read this. And early in those days, you know, when a new trade this is when I'd only buy trades. When a new trade would drop, I'd go to the front and read all the way to the new book and read them over and over again. But I had to stop doing that at some point, especially when I started reading monthly. And so to be back here and be like, seeing shit I forgot about, you know, seeing these relationships in their infancy or knowing where they could go based on the book, it's crazy.
Yeah. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm all in with this. For me, the delight is stepping back into that world and seeing the story that I know. And I mean, I know how everything's going to unfold, but I haven't read the books in a long time, and so it's cool to be able to just sit back and watch this in a new medium. And I think overall the casting is great. The action set pieces that need to be great are great, but more than that, I mean, I'm just excited for everyone to experience the story. Because at this point, y'all don't know shit. Like there is just so much great stuff and crazy and scary stuff ahead of us. That there's some foreshadowing for in these few episodes that I'm very excited specifically for Andy to experience and to re-experience again. And I'm glad it's getting its due. Shout out to I think Seth Rogen was one of the people that helped bring this right, and I think he plays Alan the Alien if I'm not mistaken.
He does.
And that was great. He's funny as hell in this. I mean, Zachary Quinto as Robot. I mean, the talent they got in this.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That might be my favorite performance of the show. Zachary Quinto as Robot is so ridiculously perfect. Yeah. And it's like, he nailed it as Spock as well, but like, this is really good.
And it's the sign of, it's really the sign of like, of the good voice actor specifically, where I don't recognize the voice at first because I'm so immersed in the character. And it was one of those things where it was nagging me. I mean, I remember seeing his name a while back, but it was nagging me about episode 2 when he shows up about halfway through. I was like, God damn it, now I gotta look that up. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, it's Zach Quinto. That's awesome. It's so cool to have him there. And then of course, I think J.K. Simmons and Sandra Oh and the whole family. I think
the cast is insane. And that was the thing. When Robot started talking, I was like, is that Spock? And I was like, because like I know they announced the voice cast forever ago and made a big deal about it, but that was forever ago, and it's different than having the show, right? And so then you're in it, it's like, holy shit, that is Spock, and like I knew Mark Hamill and all this other stuff. I was like, damn, this is just such a fucking cast.
Bro, you can't do an animated show without Mark Hamill.
Gotta
put Mark Hamill in there.
I was able to go back and rewatch it on Amazon Prime, and the X-ray stuff. They do a great job with Amazon X-ray and showing you little tidbits behind the making of the actual show.
I love that feature.
And and it was also just great to be like, who's that? Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
They got that person. Good for them.
Here's a question I have for Kevin, whose favorite character I think is Cecil. How do you feel about Walton Goggins' performance as Cecil?
So here's the thing. I feel like Walter plays a little younger than I'd like. I wish there was a little bit more ruggedness. I like when he gets worked up, but I also love Walton.
Goggins.
Yeah.
Goggins.
I think he's Goggins.
It's a weird one.
Yeah.
Really weird hearing him without a
Karate Kid.
It's weird hearing him without a Western accent.
What does that mean?
Without hearing him like a ding,
From Justified. I know. I love
weird hearing him. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's cool, and it's one of those things that, like, now when I'm like, oh yeah, I named my dog after an obscure character, people are gonna be like, oh okay, no, that makes.
I've heard of that show.
I'm sure that like, if this gets further along, they're gonna be like, wait, why would you name him after him? And then it gets further, things will make sense.
No, honestly, that's exactly what happened. Where like at the end, and I started giving all the Easter eggs. I'm like, and Cecil, that's what Kevin named his dog after. And Jen's like, why? And I'm like, you'll see. You know what I mean? Just stick with it. There's more.
We'll get there.
He's more than some pencil pusher.
7 seasons down, maybe.
Yeah, and I hope we get them. I really, really enjoyed the first 3 episodes. I enjoyed each one of them as a standalone episode as well. I think that the first episode ending where it did was shocking to me, because I'm like, wow, they're actually cruising through this. They're not trying to save some stuff. And I understand that they needed to do that as the hook. Like Andy was saying, I agree. The episode starts pretty slow, but once you get there, it's like, okay, how can you not watch the next one immediately? I feel like they're building such a great story that I think that the runtime allows them to really not get in their own way and to tell the story of the comics and not cut things, just completely tell the story with the character moments, with all the development. And that's really what makes Invincible special. Like the fact that in these 3 episodes, Andy, like, I don't know if you agree with this. Obviously we come into this knowing them, so we're a little biased, but like when we get the first crew and they're all killed, and then immediately the second episode we get a whole new crew of people, Do you feel like they did a good job introducing all of them, or are you kind of just like, fuck, there's just way too many characters to keep track of?
No, I thought it was perfectly fine. I think it's what the show needed. I had no issues with that whatsoever. And you mentioning the runtime, I think that's also one of those things where I look at the animation quality and go, well, the show is 43 minutes. Like,
Yeah, it's a lot.
13 to 18 extra minutes of animation as opposed to like usually a half-hour run or whatever. And when we say a half hour, it's more like 22 minutes or whatever. That's a lot more time to animate, and that's a lot more money goes to that. But yeah, I totally agree. I think introducing this brand new squad worked perfectly fine because we get enough of what we need, right? Like, I don't need crazy backstory. They talk about who they are. They immediately show what their personalities are, and you're immediately in. And it's like, okay, what's going to happen with this new group? And then we see Omni-Man looking at the new group going pathetic, like what's this setting up for the future? It's just so intriguing. And it just reminds me of watching The Boys. Obviously there's a lot of parallels there, but it reminds me of watching The Boys and saying, these are the parallels that they're drawing between old comics or whatever. One thing I was talking with Chris Anka about, the Weapons Arbiter, is that he was mentioning that the dialogue of the show is a little less self-referential than the comic, that the comic did a lot more kind of tongue-in-cheek things saying, hey, this is a joke. It's an inside joke if you know comics, if you understand sort of what comic books are.
They bring this more to, I think, a more real world era, right? Like, because they can't I'm sure they're going to find a way to get away with some of it, but like one of the great bits of it was like talking about the comics medium, because like Mark collects comics and he loves Science Dog.
Yeah.
20 years
Science Dog.
later, they've changed it to Seance Dog, which I fucking love.
Why?
Because Doctor Strange, like people understand. You look at that, and you're like, oh, Doctor Strange, I get it. They think it's an MCU reference, not that, and it is, but it's also a reference to the comic book people. Like if you remember Science Dog, we're doing this. You're like, all right, that's cute. I like that.
I like Science Dog.
But like the comic, it had a great a gag they used a couple of different times, which was like when Invincible first started coming, and I think it was actually referencing some just other stuff of reusing the same panels with little differences. And so there was this great one of like when Mark goes to get his Science Dog book signed, he meets the guy and he's like, people bring up this all the time. Don't you think it's kind of cheap? And they use the same panel a bunch of times. The guy's just like, no, like really it's shit funny. Like that, like the little things you can only get away.
And, with that, it's like backing up what Greg and Eddie are both saying here, of just like the animation quality being what it is to sustain that runtime. It fits into that. There's a lot of scenes in this that there's really like no motion in the frame. It's just the two characters next to each other and then their mouth just kind of moving as they talk, like almost Red versus Blue style. But it's like we don't need crazy shit happening all the time because, again, it's service of the story, and they're really doing a good job with that. The one thing that I have a criticism with the episode so far is I do think that the animated medium is holding them back in a way that it doesn't feel like The Boys, where it doesn't feel like they're always committing to the tone. And an example of that for me is when Mark's like doesn't have his powers yet and he's trying to learn to fly and he's outside the house, and then like I forget who it was, the mailman or whatever, like is walking by and they're talking and he's like, oh, sorry, and then he kind of stands there and then he like falls back and it's like a weird cartoony joke thing. And there's multiple moments throughout the 3 episodes like that I just feel like they wouldn't have in a live action thing. It's only because it's a cartoon that they're doing that. And I just wish that they would lean harder into the more mature angle of it. And mature doesn't just mean blood and saying the F word. It's like the way that characters interact with each other when they're not doing superhero stuff. And it's just every once in a while it kind of took me out of it. But overall, I really enjoyed it.
I do think what lends to the animated aspect is the voice actors being able to sound cartoony and it still work, though. Like, I don't know if obviously we have these twins characters, these villains, and they sound like cartoony to me, and it's perfectly fine. And it works because it's a cartoon. And I think if it were a live action, I think you start to get a bit more monotony with the voice acting. And I guess when they're cartoon characters, they're able to sort of be overly bombastic and just super over exaggerated. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of moments, Tim, where we get just the still shot and just the mouth moving. And I think the main thing that bothers me about that is that sometimes the eyes are stuck there as well when they should be emoting and kind of a bit more expressive. but there's just shots where the eyes look dead, and and it's like, what are the eyes looking at right now? What character? It just there's little moments like that kind of I find bothersome. But then you get the big moments that definitely are animated amazingly.
If this hits and does really well, it'll be interesting to see what season 2 looks like. Because I imagine, it was like, this is the budget you have and go for it. Because there's like literally like one shot, and I forget in which one of the 3 episodes it is, maybe it's multiple, where like Invincible's flying down, and it's like clearly just like they took the JPEG of him and like moved it around.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like it like looks like that.
cool
It kind of takes me out of it, but
you're talking about
that.
You're talking about the far shot where he's like a lot smaller.
Yeah,
and he's just kind of like moving around.
He's like flying down. I think.
They just did like a motion thing on After Effects. So, it doesn't look super great in a lot of those moments, but
I think it speaks to the quality of the story, right? That like you see that stuff and we're still not like, oh, you know what I mean? Worst thing ever.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that if they were to, I definitely think they could make a case after these few episodes to get more budget. But having said that, if I were an Amazon exec, I'd be like, why? It's fucking great.
Yeah, you guys are killing it.
I'm not giving you guys any more money. It's great.
But I'm sure it'll be. I would imagine universally this will be the thing, right? And there's so many people who are like Makuga. I was on Makuga's show the other day, the Good People Association, and he was like, and they were trying to help us sell Josh on watching Invincible. He's like, I just don't like cartoons, and so if you show up and this looks like a low rent at times cartoon, I think you're like, oh yeah, whatever. Do you even stay for the kicker? Do you care about the characters?
I mean, here's the easy sell. Josh, you got a kid now. Kids love cartoons. Let them watch Invincible.
Let them watch it.
No.
Yeah,
she's so young too. She won't know about the violence or anything.
Yeah,
So
she's
it's
not
like,
gonna. Surely an eyeball popping out of a socket's not gonna traumatize her forever.
Or the big mace weapon being knocked into the fish guy and it's just
that was
whole fucking
awesome.
cranium being destroyed.
I will say, Greg, to counter something you said earlier, where you said you liked this scene. I liked it more in the comic books because for reasons that we'll get into later. But I like Omni-Man being super OP.
Unstoppable.
In the comics, though, you're not supposed to know that it was him until the end of it, right?
No. In the scene, he shows up and it's like you're not supposed to know until like literally you turn the next page that it's him.
Right.
Now. So it's like all of them are suddenly getting bludgeoned and killed and fisted. And you're like, what the hell?
He literally like just fucking chops people's heads off with like the side of his hand,
like he did with Immortal or whatever.
Yeah, but like that's anyway. I don't want to get into spoiler territory, but I like
look at that right there.
Him in the comic books where he was like. You were terrified of him when you turned that page.
My thing here is like I think they still established that
they do. He still
is that thing. Or he took out all the most powerful people at once. So like.
Yeah, but him struggling kind of, it's just a different vibe. It's a different interpretation.
I hear you. I understand.
But to me, when I turned that page, I was like, oh my, what? Like, who's going to stop him now? And I was left with that scene going, okay, well, they kind of like put him in a coma. So it's not like he's, like if people really wanted to, they could potentially
stop him. If they keep throwing more supers at him, you think they could.
But it felt like in the comic book, it felt like there's nothing anyone could throw at him on Earth that could even come close to stopping him. And that feeling of dread, I think, is super important for that character progression.
It has it strayed super far away from the comics? Just aside from that scene, has there been anything? Because
there's little things here and there.
Yeah,
Barrett has read a decent amount of it. So I walked out and said, I just watched Invincible. He's like, oh, where did it end? And I was like, well, I don't really know how true to the comics. So I don't really want to spoil it, but Robot lets the 2 clones out of the facility, out of the prison facility or whatever. And he's like, oh, really? Wow. So when did they do the big twist? And I was like, oh, it's the end of episode 1. So like I'm wondering if they are going to stray far away from the source material and what stuff that they will change. Obviously, I don't want to really know, but I want to know. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, Robert Kirkman, I was watching an interview and he was saying that like they're like, we have a dope story, we're going to tell that dope story. Mm-hmm. Like the whole point of this is adapting what exists. And he's like, I hope that one day we can tell the whole story. And with changes along the ways and like some updates, just socially and whatever. But yeah, I had a similar issue to what Makuga has with Gia, because Gia hates cartoons, completely hates cartoons, and like she just struggles to get engaged and keep engaged with them, even if the story's really good. And she was struggling with this, and like there was moments where she was really like putting up with it, but then when the end happened, she was captivated. Like, the end of episode 1, it was totally a like, oh my God, holy shit. And like from there on, she was like paying attention way more. And it's like, that's the power of good storytelling is like when you have these moments. And she said something that I thought was really interesting. She's like, this is one of my favorite types of storytelling where it's not a who done it, it's a why done it. Like we know he killed it, but why did you kill everybody? And working through it all, it's like a good level of mystery.
But to be fair, also, and to be fair to to just the story in general, this is how I felt reading the books as well. I remember Greg going like, "You got to read this," and I remember like getting halfway through the first book and being like, "This is not very engaging to me. I don't know why Greg would keep telling me to read this." And then when we do get to that scene, you're like, "Oh, that was a red herring. That was all set up. That was all just a." So I hope that people can get through that first episode, and I'm wondering, and if that is a fear of theirs, of like how engaging that first episode is, because you really do have to get through the first like couple to really understand what they're doing with the world.
I think putting the twist at the end the way they did alleviates it, because that's what I keep telling people, right? Is I kept, before knowing anything about the show, I was like, watch until the twist, and then now that it's in episode 1, it's like just finish episode 1's post-credit scene. And if you're like there, you're not into it, and you're not interested, I think then bounce. But
see, that's funny
everybody
to me
I've seen is with it.
This wasn't the specific part that really got me.
Oh, you want
that?
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So that's the thing that like I'm wondering if people are going to be able to get to further down the road when to me the story became really, really engaging.
I think that's next episode. If they're the way they've been tracking the comic books, if we're talking about the same thing, which we're
100% talking about the same thing. Yeah,
but I think it's next episode, and I think that's gonna be dope, because that was like, again, back to talking about Gia's reaction to it, or people who have no attachment to it, like Andy, but loves superheroes. But it was a thing of when we finished it, right? Like it went from like, hey, let's try this, and if you guys don't like it, I can watch it later, kind of thing. And then Jen being like, all right, do you have more? Like that's always what you want to hear. Right? All right, can we watch another one? Like, now we don't have any more. We gotta wait till then.
And shout out to Amazon for releasing them at 5 fucking p.m. Dude.
Look at
enough
that.
with this.
Come on,
enough
Disney.
with this midnight shit, Disney.
Come on, Disney.
Enough. Fix it.
Fix it,
Tired of this
motherfuckers.
shit, dude. There's other stuff I wanted to mention that I'm not super thinking of right.
You'll be back
now.
next week. You can always do it.
We'll be back next week. Yeah.
Be back next week, everybody. Remember, you can get this show on youtube.com/kindoffunny or as a podcast. Right now, search the Kind of Funny screencast feed, and we'll be there for you to listen to. And I have a very, very fun announcement to make right now. Next week on the Kind of Funny podcast, we're actually going to have Robert Kirkman himself joining us. We'll be able to talk about a whole bunch of cool stuff. How insane is that, Andy?
It's creator
That's
of Invincible.
Wild. I mean, it should be more wild to you all, but it's also very wild to me.
Insane. Creator of Walking Dead, creator of Invincible. Oh my God. We're going to have a blast. It's going to be a good time. Until then, love you guys. Bye.